Martin Heidegger is considered by many to be the greatest philosopher of the 20th century. Heidegger was born in Germany in 1889 and died in Germany in 1976. He has a not so good past, but nonetheless is extremely influential. So Heidegger originally was brought up very religious, a Catholic, and went on to become a priest before eventually deciding to not do that, falling away from his Catholicism and turning to the study of philosophy. And Heidegger ends up studying under Edmund Husserl, who really began what becomes known as phenomenology in continental philosophy, the study of phenomena and the way we experience things in the world. So Heidegger is basically Husserl's premier student. Until, of course, in Germany, the Nazi Party comes along and fascism starts to take over, and Heidegger actually joins the Nazi Party, and Husserl, who's was Jewish, Heidegger actually played a role in getting his mentor thrown out of where he taught so he could no longer teach. Heidegger is regarded by many, including Hannah Arendt, to not be a good person, to put it lightly at all. And there's a lot about Heidegger where he, even after the Nazis lost, and although Heidegger was never involved, of course, in any of the directly or anything like that, in any of the atrocities committed by the Nazis, he never actually renounced his views and why he was part of the Nazi Party. That just kind of remained mostly silent after World War II. But his philosophy is so, in many ways, groundbreaking. It's something entirely different. Heidegger, in many ways, challenges people to rethink what it means to think about the world, about being, metaphysics, the human experience. And this originally starts with his most famous work, Being and Time, published in 1927. This is a super important work, and it's considered a key text in phenomenology, in existentialism, in metaphysics. And then later on you get some of his essays and lectures, like The Origin of Art, What is Metaphysics, The Question Concerning Technology, which of course we're discussing in this video, and many other more sometimes people think it's more abstract and ambiguous because he starts to turn towards poetry. So some people try to distinguish the later Heidegger from the early Heidegger. But let's get into this text, The Question Concerning Technology. So first I just want to ask, of course, what is technology? So what do we consider to be technology? Is it simply, of course, little tools and gadgets like a screwdriver? Is it that which involves engineering? Is it more things involving, nanotech, or I guess we could say nanotechnology, things that involve not necessarily that it's tangible and physical, like, for example, a plow, but now it involves software and programming and things like that. There are many different ways we can think about technology, and we'll see Heidegger distinguishes modern technology from technology that reigned for most of human existence. And then how do we think about technology then? That, for example, leads Heidegger to make that distinction, but where we could see that technology maybe is just in something like glasses, but that is somehow different in many ways from what it allows us to do from maybe like a phone, which is different from a glass, and so on. And ultimately then, what does technology mean to us? What role does it play in our lives? What significance do we give it? So these are just some kind of preliminary, very basic questions to start off with about technology. And is technology essential to our life? We'll see for Heidegger, it's yes. So he says that to actually question technology, this takes a challenging of that which is taken for granted, that we have to begin to, in a very kind of basic philosophical way, but for Heidegger, it's a very serious way, which we have to challenge what we take for granted in the world. All the ways in which we interact with, which we make sense of, our phones, our cars, laptops, chairs, whatever it may be, our clothes, all of these things. We have to challenge that which we take for granted about these things. Because when we normalize these things, when we no longer begin to question some of the fundamental presuppositions about them, for Heidegger, we miss out on the essence of technology and all the things around us which we then take for granted, what they really are. So questioning concerning technology requires a deliberation, a careful consideration then, where we have to listen, as Heidegger says, and hear what it is that comes out as we interact with technology. So he says, questioning builds a way, and we should like to build a free relationship to it. What is a free relationship? That'll come a bit later. But he says the relationship will be free if it opens our human existence to the essence of technology. And so then we have to kind of take off the shackles of the ways in which we are kind of in some way determined to see and interact with technology. And that is why then we take it for granted, that, as he calls, destining of technology. So we want to get then at the essence of technology. What is technology? That thing which, if it didn't have, it would not be technology. He first wants to point out that technology is not equivalent to the essence of technology, that we can't just simply look at technology and give a technological answer as to then what the essence of technology is. So an essence is not simply what a thing is, it's something a bit more complex, that for Heidegger, it is how it pursues its course, how a thing goes about coming to be what it is, how it presents itself to us. He says it is the way in which it remains through time as what it is. So when we are seeking the essence of a tree, we have to become aware that the essence, which pervades every tree, which makes a tree what it is, such that when we interact with it, we take it to be a tree, as a tree then, is not itself a tree that can be encountered among all the other trees. We have to look then for that which is the process of bringing the tree to be, and not the tree itself, not anything that is necessarily the treeness, we could say, about the thing, but that which is the in some ways the kind of principle which brings it to be how we experience what it is, as then designating it to be a tree as opposed to a chair or a cat here. So, in continuing to question then, what is technology? What is the essence of technology? What makes that thing which we designate to be technology, technology? Heidegger says there are two common definitions. On the one hand, there's the instrumental definition where we say technology is a means to an end, because of course this phone is a kind of informational device. It is a communicative device. It is a means to information. And this could be information based on Google. I could look things up. This could be information based on calling people, texting them, talking to them, and conveying information that way. That this glass here is a means to an end, which is to hold water such that I can drink it. And if it, had an open thing in the bottom here and it was just some kind of a cylinder, it would not then have that, it would not be able to fulfill that end of which it is a means, because the water, of course, would flow out and I couldn't drink from it. The second definition is more anthropological, which is that technology is just a kind of human activity, a way in which we interact with the world. So considering these two definitions of technology, for Heidegger, these definitions do not get at the essence, but they remain only in the appearance of the thing itself. They don't allow us to see what it is that persists in presencing this phone, as a piece of technology, and this book as a piece of technology. That it is not the final product which is the essence of technology. It is what allows it to become present as technology, which is the essence. So, for Heidegger, we are led to ask, what is then the instrumental itself that is a means to an end? What is the cause of this means to an end that allows this thing to appear as something which has a final product, a final orientation, a final purpose? And here, this is where Heidegger, we see in this text specifically, of course not just in this text, but this is where we see Heidegger begin to go back to the Greeks. And Heidegger is going to want to go back to the Greeks, but specifically Aristotle. So he says, what technology is, when represented as a means, discloses itself. So it shows itself to us, of which previously it had been hidden, when we trace back to fourfold causality. So Aristotle's four causes are the ways in which Heidegger says a thing is held responsible or indebted. That it is not responsible in the sense of course, like a negative sense that like you are responsible for this person doing such and such because of what you did to them, but it is what makes possible, we could say. That's a much better way to understand this. It's what makes possible. And so it is indebted then with something else which then makes it possible. And so there are these four causes, the four things of which a final product, like a chalice, he gives the example of a bronze chalice, is indebted to. So there is, and he lists the Latin names here, the causa materialis, or just the material cause, the causa formalis, the formal causa finalis, the final cause, and the causa efficiens, the efficient cause, as it's traditionally known, or the moving or mover cause is another way to interpret that cause. And so, if you remember when we discussed Aristotle way back towards the beginning of the semester, and we discussed the four causes, in taking the bronze chalice, what is it that makes this chalice what a chalice is? Well, we can look at the material cause, such that is the bronze material itself, such that if it were paper, it might not quite be a chalice if it doesn't hold itself in the way that bronze allows it to be, so to do. We look at the formal cause, which is the shape of the chalice, which, of course, you need the material to allow it to be shaped into something. So not all kinds of material can maybe be shaped into a chalice, such that it allows us to drink, which then would be the final cause, which is the purpose of the bronze chalice. So in the similar way of this glass, it is to drink, to hold liquid, typically. And then you have the efficient or moving cause, which is that thing which is to some extent more controversial, and that would be the thing which kind of brings the material, the form, and the final cause together. So in the case of the bronze chalice, it would be the artisan, of course, which is indebted to the material cause, the idea perhaps, which is the form, maybe more like the skill to bring about the form, and of which the idea then is the final cause of what it's intended for. But these are more artificial things that exist. Of course, we can apply this, take the case of a tree, that the material cause would be all the fibers which make up the tree. The formal cause would be the shape of the tree with the trunk and then the branches and the leaves and so on, such that it spreads out to, it's able to get sunlight. The final cause would be a tree, treeing, doing what trees do to take in sun, to, maybe give birth to seeds which, fall and plant the ground, new trees and so on. And the moving cause would be the treeing itself, that process by which the fibers interact in such a way made possible by the form in which the fibers then are shaped to make possible then the treeing. So Heidegger then wants to, in looking at Aristotle, in this understanding of the four causes, how we can think about the beings of things, what it is for things to be. And so, of course, we're always going to, in this text, go back to technology. And asking what is the essence of technology, thinking about it through, in this case, the material cause, the formal cause, final cause, and efficient or moving cause. To some extent, of course, this is not simply adequate, because for Heidegger, we're beginning to get at the question then of what is that thing that persists in making possible the coming to be of technology, but which is not technology itself, so technology itself is not its essence. But to some extent, this is still a bit on the surface level. We haven't quite gotten to the metaphysics of technology itself. So Heidegger, then, in remaining, as we will through the rest of this text, with Greek terminology, Greek concepts, and specifically an Aristotelian interpretation of these Greek concepts, he looks at the Greek word poiesis, which is translated as a bringing forth. And he says the moving cause, or the efficient cause, then, brings forth the object. In the same way the artisan is able to shape, of course, and bring into being that bronze chalice. So poiesis, then, is an activity, this bringing forth, making possible, is an activity that produces something that was not there before, because prior to bringing the bronze together and molding it into a certain shape such that it then would fulfill the purpose of drinking out of it, that final product of the chalice did not exist before. So something then has been made present through the process of what he calls occasioning. And so the occasioning then is this bringing forth of the items into a something that is now present that we can use and interact with. This bringing forth, the poiesis, is part of an unconcealing. It's unconcealing a possibility of the existence of something, of a being. So, bringing forth, he says, comes to pass only insofar as something concealed comes into unconcealment. And unconcealment is translated from the Greek aletheia. Aletheia, in Latin, is understood as veritas, and in English, it's translated as truth. And so very quickly, in inquiring, in questioning our concern with technology, what technology is, the essence of it, we have moved to questioning what it is that makes possible what technology does, that being a means to an end. We have looked at then the efficient cause, the moving cause, which is the bringing forth of the object of technology, like a glass or a phone. We've said that this is then an unconcealing of a possibility, such as being a phone which can communicate. And that unconcealing, in looking back at the Greek word of which this is derived, aletheia, is translated as truth. And so here this amazing revealing has occurred, where now, in questioning the essence of technology, we are talking about truth. That technology brings forth that which is true. It brings forth a state of affairs, which we say then would be what is the real. So he says, technology is therefore no mere means. Technology is a way of revealing. If we give heed to this, then another whole realm for the essence of technology will open itself up to us. It is the realm of revealing, i.e., of truth. And so when a clay potter, I don't know, makes a statue or something, out of clay, there is some truth that is being revealed by the potter that could be such of a Greek discus thrower, and so the truth of the beauty of the form of a perfect discus thrower, or something which then makes us question about like the thinker. Okay, we could take that and think like, well, what is the point of this, right? There's something we're trying to get at, which is the true. And this is something now that we're going to see kind of begins to really shift our inquiry into technology, because now we begin to not simply think of technology as a means to an end that just allows us to get around in the world, but it's a way of presenting the world to us. Okay, so then looking at truth in this way of presenting the world to us, and then having knowledge then of the world such that it is, and how technology allows us then to understand it. He looks at two Greek words for knowledge, techne and episteme. Techne is understood as a kind of knowledge which involves activities and skills of a craftsman. So, and we discussed this a little bit in Plato's Theaetetus, of course, where the question in that text is what is knowledge, and Theaetetus is a mathematician and studies, astronomy and geometry and things like that. And basically, originally, Theaetetus, that preliminary definition he gives is that, well, knowledge is doing math or something like that, right? It is techne, kind of. He wants to consolidate the definition of knowledge just to the form of techne. And so techne is not simply then just activities or skills of a craftsman, which would be, of course, being a carpenter. It could be a construction worker. It could be a painter. But it is also involves the arts, and not arts like in dancing and music, but also the fine arts. So anything that involves a kind of undergoing of any activity which then in some way brings about something, whether it be a feeling, a mood, in some way, could be, we could say, means to an ends, in terms of if I'm a carpenter and I build some steps so that I can walk into my house, right? Then I have knowledge of how to bring those things about. So the word techne, Heidegger says, is linked to the word episteme, because they both are translated as knowledge. Episteme is more of a kind of factual knowledge. So, Heidegger says then, techne is a knowledge of revealing then. He says, thus, what is decisive in techne does not lie at all in making and manipulating, nor in the use of means, but rather in the aforementioned revealing. It is as revealing, not as manufacturing, that techne is a bringing forth. And he wants to make sure that he's not trying to say then that in linking technology to a bringing forth of what is true, a state of affairs, of knowledge, of understanding how to go about, as maybe an artisan, bringing about things into this world, that it's not a manipulation, that we just kind of create things which are like somehow a deception, an illusion, but it is very much, for Heidegger, in its own right, a way of understanding the world, and not simply an artifice that is, put in front of the real, which it really underlies then that, illusion. That he's not, because it is not then that we can just say, well, like Plato, a painting is less real, it's kind of an illusion, of the real, which could be the landscape of which the painting is of, or something like that. That the painting is a way of revealing something true about then the landscape as well, and that, witnessing the landscape, there's something then true about that as well, of what the significance we take for it to be in our world, and the way these things are connected and making sense of the world and our activity in it. Now, he puts forward an objection. So, it is said that modern technology is something incomparably different from all earlier technologies because it is based on modern physics as an exact science. And this is where, too, right? Typically, and this kind of occurred in philosophy, but, typically we distinguish the arts from the sciences. So if you in university you study, maybe you're going to study the arts, which could be more the humanities like history or the fine arts or something else. Philosophy is considered in that. As opposed to the sciences, which, the natural sciences, of course, are more pure. But you have the social sciences as well, like psychology and sociology, of which they're more quantifiable. And so in that way, then, modern technology, then the objection would be that it's different because it's based more around in this exact science that can be quantified, as opposed to arts, which are more qualitative, and you can't necessarily define in a strict, rigid way how exactly they work. So continuing with this objection, he says, meanwhile, we have come to understand more clearly that the reverse holds true as well. Modern physics, as experimental, is dependent upon technical apparatus and upon progress in the building of apparatus. The establishing of this mutual relationship between technology and physics is correct. That Heidegger is saying, yes, this objection is correct, that there is something different with modern technology, that it is informed by, of course, physics and what makes physics possible, but in turn, technology also informs physics and makes physics able to progress in ways that it could not have done before without, getting better telescopes, more accurate telescopes, and so on. So the establishing of this mutual relationship between technology and physics is correct, but it remains a merely historiographical establishing of facts and says nothing about that in which this mutual relationship is grounded. The decisive question still remains. Of what essence is modern technology that it happens to think of putting exact science to use? So simply trying to say that the essence of modern technology is in some way a putting forward of physics or something like that. Heidegger is saying, yes, that relationship, it is very much real. It's true that that relationship exists. But it still does not answer the question, of course, of why it is then that technology and physics have been married. What is it that they are bringing forth then in that marriage? So modern technology, Heidegger says, reveals through a challenging forth. So we were, of course, talking about a bringing forth. But a bringing forth which is more closely associated with the artisan, with the arts, with TECHNE, in the more traditional historical sense and not necessarily the modern sense. Instead, he says, modern technology is not simply a bringing forth, but a challenging forth. And this, of course, invokes a sense of struggle. And not just struggle, but a sense in which one is dared to do so. This, he says, involves ordering, control, and efficiency, such that modern technology, then, in challenging forth nature, is not simply a bringing forth in the way in which we get, the artisan has the bronze and they mold it into the chalice, but now there's a challenging forth to order all things in nature, to control it, and do so as efficiently as possible. In so doing, Heidegger says, the world is now ordered, through what modern technology does, the world is now ordered and arranged into what he calls a standing reserve. It is always on hand, at the ready, to be called upon, to be used in such a way that it has already been determined is what it is. The technological mode of revealing, he says, puts to nature the unreasonable demand that it supply energy that can be extracted and stored as such. That now, and so here we're beginning to see the difference between modern technology and more traditional technology. That now, nature becomes a standing reserve of energy. So he compares this to pre-industrialization and the rise of modern technology here. I'll read from pages 14 to 15. So he says, right, but does this not hold true that, arranging nature into the standing reserve, putting nature to this unreasonable demand that it supply energy that can be extracted and stored? Yes, does this also not hold true for the old windmill as well? He says, no. Its sails do indeed turn in the wind. They are left entirely to the wind's blowing. But the windmill does not unlock energy from the air currents in order to store it. So, the windmill does not always have on hand nature predetermined as something which then is energy which can be stored and which is simply defined in this definite way as simply energy. As, the appearance is wind, but really the essence is energy. The appearance of the soil is dirt and nutrients, but really it's energy. That's not how it worked. In contrast, a tract of land is challenged into the putting out of coal and ore. The earth now reveals itself as a coal mining district, the soil as a mineral deposit. The field that the peasant formerly cultivated and set in order appears differently than it did when to set in order still meant to take care of and to maintain. The work of the peasant does not challenge the soil of the field. In the sowing of the grain, it places the seed in the keeping of the forces of growth and watches over its increase. But meanwhile, even the cultivation of the field has come under the grip of another kind of setting in order, which sets upon nature. It sets upon it in the sense of challenging it. Agriculture is now the mechanized food industry. Air is now set upon to yield nitrogen. The earth to yield ore, or to yield uranium. For example, uranium is set upon to yield atomic energy, which can be released either for destruction or for peaceful use. That now the world is already prearranged into a way that it is always on hand to be extracted, the energy source, whatever it may be, that then is used in the particular way of, again, the nuclear weapon, or, of course, a nuclear reactor to provide energy for houses. Energy to produce food, energy to extract from the air, all these ways in which, as before, technology did not do, now the world is encountered as this standing reserve, as already ordered, as already under control. And while not necessarily, that doesn't mean, of course, it's always being used this way, but it is essentially on call, that it is already kind of in the background, think of it this way. And a lot of this stems from, being in time, is more phenomenological works, specifically of the human experience. The ways in which he talks about, like, how, I'm facing this camera on my laptop, but the background of this room that I am not consciously being attentive to, such that when I turn now, I see this wall over here. When I'm looking at this camera, that wall and all of it is on hand such that it is as a wall as I understand. And it is only when, take for example, like a door handle, okay? I have an understanding of what a door handle is, and I always use it to turn and kind of open the door. And I don't necessarily have to look at the handle and investigate and say, okay, this is a door handle. It's used for opening the door. It's kind of in the background, already on hand for me to use in a more less than strictly immediate conscious way. But let's say, I go, as I'm talking to someone, I reach for the door handle to open the door as I'm walking through, talking to them. And as I reach, it is no longer there, right? Well, that suddenly causes me to reset myself in the context of my surroundings, because now what had been on hand, what would be this standing reserve, is no longer there, such that I need to immediately kind of reorient myself. And what Heidegger is saying is that the possibility of needing to reorient oneself, or even desiring to do so, is never there, because now with modern technology, everything, the entire world, every facet of it has already been ordered in such a way that it now is arranged as this standing reserve, already on hand in a defined way. So Heidegger speaks then of the human being as, when discussing the being of a human, that it is simply what it means for us to exist. We are not, our being is not simply the same being of a tree, of a book, of a cat, of a chair, of a rock, but that he refers to the being of a human as DASEIN. So the German is roughly their being, or being there. And DASEIN is a being which is aware of its own being. It's an experience of being that is peculiar only to human beings, because we are basically challenged forth to question and make sense of our existence, of which other beings do not do. And with this, we'll see, this is essential in moving forward with the question of the essence of technology. So, in thinking about that then, and beginning to see the way in which the human is that part of the efficient cause, which is why then we went down the whole path of aletheia and technology being a way of revealing the world to us in its various ways, such that at one point in time, certain technologies allow us to see the world as back in the time of René Descartes, the world was kind of understood in this mechanical way, where things kind of, the way the world works physically is things bump into one another, and that's how all the things in the world move. And then later on, an advance in technology allows us to understand, no, actually, things don't require, they don't work in this mechanized causal way, but instead there's gravity and these kind of forces of attraction and repulsion and how they work. And technology allows us then to understand the world in different ways because of that. So with poiesis, this bringing forth, Heidegger says humans are one element among others then in the process of bringing forth, in the same way that the efficient cause is one element then along with the material, formal, and final cause. But, he says, only to the extent that man for his part is already challenged to exploit the energies of nature can this ordering, revealing happen. So only to the extent that we are already kind of with this, where we have this impulse to exploit, as he says, right, the energies of nature, such that then this revealing can happen in such a way that the world is put as a standing reserve to be used as energy for all sorts of industries around the world. Now, does this then mean, Heidegger asks, that human beings belong among the standing reserve more originally than nature? That, are we kind of the secondary to nature itself, he wants to ask. That then technology would be maybe a mediation between us, where we are secondary to nature. And he gives an answer here on page 18. And the answer is no, but we'll see exactly what he says. So, he says, only to the extent that man, for his part, is already challenged to exploit the energies of nature, can this ordering, revealing happen? If man is challenged, ordered to do this, then does not man himself belong even more originally than nature within the standing reserve? The current talk about human resources, about the supply of patients for a clinic, gives evidence of this. And so here now we're beginning to see the kind of social sphere upon which now this question of technology, where it's not simply just in the ways in which we think of nature somehow being separate or divorced from like human beings. Now we're seeing as well this is a social question, not simply a technological, natural, or a question of physics. And so think about, human networking, human resources, and we talk a little bit about this with Marx in the Paris manuscripts and the ways in which human beings are in some way alienated from one another because, social networking where you just see one as another means to an end. That's something similar to what he's getting at here. Heidegger's not a Marxist, though. Of course, because he, joined the Nazi Party. Fascists are opposed to Marxism. But, so he says, the forester who, in the wood, measures the felled timber, and to all appearances walks the same forest path in the same way as did his grandfather, is today commanded by profit-making in the lumber industry, whether he knows it or not. So the forester, the lumberjack, who might now see themselves as doing what their grandfather did before them, and going about in the woods cutting down trees and providing wood for the community. The Heidegger says what is actually making possible that challenging forth to cut down the trees of that role of a lumberjack is something different because the impetus is different. It is now driven by profit, which is part of this ordering and efficiency of now how nature is understood. He says he is made subordinate to the orderability of cellulose, which for its part is challenged forth by the need for paper, which is then delivered to newspapers and illustrated magazines. The latter, in their turn, set public opinion to swallowing what is printed, so that a set configuration of opinion becomes available on demand. Yet precisely because man is challenged more originally than are the energies of nature, i.e., into the process of ordering, he never is transformed into mere standing reserve. Since man drives technology forward, he takes part in ordering as a way of revealing. So still then, although it's slightly different, humans are still playing that role more of the efficient cause, the moving cause. But the unconcealment itself within which ordering unfolds is never a human handiwork, any more than is the realm through which man is already passing every time he as a subject relates to an object. And so while then human beings still play that role as bringing a challenging forth of the nature into this occasioning of soil as natural resources to be burned, to fly planes or whatever, that while human beings still perform that role in taking part in this way of revealing, the human beings still too are, because of the impetus now behind that with modern technology, human beings also are defined in a certain way among a standing reserve such that they have human capital, we speak in such a way, such that then human beings too are seen in that kind of an ordered way, a calculable way, a quantifiable way as well. Now, that then the modern lumberjack who goes to cut down the trees and thinks that they are performing the same tasks as their grandfather before them, let's just say, that the lumberjack is thrown into a world then which they are, even if it's unbeknown to them, actually doing something for the sake of profit as part of this larger scheme of now how the world is understood and ordered by. Heidegger refers to this as the enframing, but it's also what he talks about in other texts as thrownness, the thrownness of DASEIN, of the human being. Because What he means by thrownness is we're kind of thrown into a situation in which the world already is understood. It's set, ordered in such a way such that our possibilities for what we want to do, for what we can do, are structured in such a way that we then go to do those in whatever those possibilities may be. And so the lumberjack cannot return to that time before of their grandfather, where maybe they could cut down trees with some small enterprise simply for the culture, and in which it's not part of this larger profit-making enterprise. The lumberjack now is thrown into the world such that this is how the world is already enframed. That all activities, not just simply the lumberjack, but teaching, serving at a restaurant, whatever it may be, that all activities of DASEIN, of the human being, are already enframed within the ordering of the technological. So he says of this, wherever man opens his eyes and ears, unlocks his heart, and gives himself over to meditating and striving, shaping and working, entreating and thinking, he finds himself everywhere already brought into the unconcealed, already thrown into a certain understanding of the world. The unconcealment of the unconcealed has already come to pass whenever it calls man forth into the modes of revealing allotted to him, such that we now, think about the way in which when you are in grade school and you're told go to college or whatever, right? It's usually framed in terms of go to college to get a degree to make money. That universities now are kind of they're factories for degrees, which are basically a kind of capital or a kind of placeholder for a position of which then you make money. Such that now education is seen as part of this enterprise of profitability. And that, so again, this unconcealment where now the world shows itself such that education then is involved with a job, making money, and not simply the flourishing of the human mind or anything like that, like it might have been before. I'll read this sentence again. Such that the unconcealment of the unconcealed has already come to pass, whenever it calls man forth into the modes of revealing allotted to him. When man, in his way, from within unconcealment, reveals that which presence is, he merely responds to the call of unconcealment, even when he contradicts it. Thus, when man, investigating, observing, ensnares nature as an area of his own conceiving, he has already been claimed by a way of revealing that challenges him to approach nature as an object of research, until even the object disappears into the objectlessness of standing reserve. That we are called forth to already see nature as this thing to be researched and kind of quantified, as opposed to many other possibilities, wherever they may be, as something involving some kind of spiritual ritual, in the offering that nature has, in the kind of pondering of the beauty of nature, in the games one can maybe play in hiking and seeking out the wonders of the world or something like that. That now, because of the world in which we are thrown into, the enframedness of the world for us now in this modern world, even we might want to say, yeah, but you can still see the world in this way, the beauty, which is not necessarily quantifiable. Heidegger was trying to say, yeah, but when we do that now, that is somehow subordinate to the primary enframing of the world as quantifiable, as ordered, as calculable, as standing reserve, as energy. That somehow, when someone says like, oh, nature is not simply just resources, right? That somehow, because of the world, the way in which we're thrown into it now, the way technology, that it has disseminated into every aspect of our lives, that it now is so totalizing that even if we want to admit, yes, nature is not simply quantifiable, that somehow still that's secondary to what the nature really is, which is quantifiable. Okay. So we're arriving then at the essence of technology. And the essence of technology is what Heidegger says, the calling which challenges DASEIN to order the self-revealing as standing reserve, as enframing. So the standing reserve he calls as enframing, right? So think of the world as set up in a certain way that it presents itself to us in a certain disposition. So he says, enframing means the gathering together of that setting upon, which sets upon man, i.e. challenges him forth, to reveal in the mode of ordering, as standing reserve. Enframing means the way of revealing which holds sway in the essence of modern technology, and which is itself nothing technological. So the essence of technology, then, is not that it is a means to an end. It is not instrumental. The essence of technology is this process of bringing forth, challenging forth the world, nature, into a standing reserve, into being enframed in a certain way. A crude way would be to kind of just say defined, right, in a certain way. The role of physics, he says, is crucial in modern technology, since in enframing, the process of ordering, control, and efficiency privileges quantity over quality. So he says, because physics indeed already is pure theory, sets nature, and pure theory is thinking of mathematics, because physics indeed already as pure mathematics sets nature up to exhibit itself as a coherence of forces calculable in advance, such that then the scientist, right, and this is something about science, it already has to be science, to do science, you already have to presuppose the world to be a certain way, and that is something which is quantifiable. Otherwise, you can never investigate the physical phenomena of the world. It must then be calculable in advance, and he says, it therefore orders its experiments precisely for the purpose of asking whether and how nature reports itself when set up this way. So the essence of technology then, and specifically, we have to understand, there's kind of, he's playing a little bit loose here. There are two ways then to understand the essence of technology as enframing. On the one hand, the essence of technology prior to modern technology is enframing in that it is a way of bringing forth the world and presenting, disclosing itself in a certain way to how we understand the world then. Modern technology is, yes, this process of not anymore bringing forth, but challenging forth, which is something more intense, this enframing of the world, but it does so in such a way that it's not open to different ways of disclosing itself, but instead now it is always solely a way of presenting the world as already quantifiable and calculable. In approaching then the relationship, the human relationship to technology then, Heidegger says that this enframing is a destiny, because it is then, in part of that thrownness, destining, right, how you see the world, such that technology allows us to, with this phone, see each other and see communication as a means of somehow like a informational transaction. And that then we are destined to then see all things as informational transactions. In the same way then that we are destined to see the world as quantifiable. This is not, of course, necessary. This way in which the modern technology is a process of enframing in this way, of destining in this way. And this is why technology is not, so Heidegger is not, and we'll see in a moment the danger, specifically in an explicit manner what the danger of modern technology is. Heidegger is not a Luddite. Heidegger is not saying we should go about then and destroy technology. Because we can't. Technology is something intimately related to the human condition. Because technology is simply just a way of making sense of the world. Or not necessarily, maybe we shouldn't. Yeah, I'll just say making a way of making sense of the world. There is freedom in this. Because first he wants to distinguish the traditional concept of freedom, which is revolves around this idea of the will, that of course traditionally philosophy typically has it that you are free if you are not compelled to do something, so you're not coerced, right? You have the ability to do whatever you choose. Heidegger's conception of freedom is a bit different. That freedom for him is a governing of the space for the possibility. That freedom is this process of enframing, but which does not limit all other kinds of enframing, but opens up a multitude, perhaps infinite way of enframing, of making sense of the world. An infinite number of possibilities of making sense of the world. So it says here on 25 that freedom governs the open in the sense of the cleared and lighted up, i.e. of the revealed. It is to the happening of revealing, i.e. of truth, that freedom stands in the closest and most intimate kinship. All revealing belongs within a harboring and a concealing. So there's this kind of, maybe you could say it's paradoxical, but it is a way in which we can't escape this enframing, because we necessarily must make sense of the world and so enframe it in a certain way, but we are not required to only see it in a certain way, in that way of, that modern technology calls us forth to do. So he says, all revealing belongs within a harboring and a concealing, but that which frees the mystery is concealed and always concealing itself. All revealing comes out of the open and goes into the open and brings into the open. The freedom of the open consists neither in unfettered arbitrariness nor in the constraint of mere laws. Freedom is that which conceals in a way that opens to light, in whose clearing there shimmers that veil that covers what comes to presence of all truth and lets the veil appear as what veils. Freedom is the realm of the destiny that at any given time starts a revealing upon its way. And so he is saying then that when we are free, we are because we understand the essence of technology. We understand that technology is a way of enframing. And so we're not ignorant to, then, what technology does. We're not ignorant to the fact that for Heidegger, there is no permanent transcendental truth. There is no inherent specific meaning to the world, but there is inherent meaning in the world, in that we are condemned basically to make sense and meaning of the world, but not any kind of specific meaning. Instead, we are free when we are aware of this bringing forth of the world which technology makes possible. So what is the danger then of modern technology? For Heidegger, there is a risk of only seeing the power of the calculable and instrumental ordering of nature. The danger of modern technology is that it says all other ways of bringing forth, all other ways of unconcealing the world are illegitimate, and that there's only one, and that we lose our freedom then when we only see the power of the instrumental ordering of nature. And he says this occurs in two ways. First, he says truth will remain hidden because human beings will see themselves as gods, while in reality only enframing human being itself as standing reserve. So the danger, the first one, occurs whereby we actually think that there is some kind of end which is truth, and that we now have attained it, which is that the world is this quantifiable thing, and that what we end up doing is actually quantifying our own selves and condemning ourselves into this box, basically. So he says of this danger, he says of this, as soon as what is unconcealed no longer concerns man even as object, but does so rather exclusively as standing reserve, and man in the midst of objectlessness is nothing but the orderer of the standing reserve, then he comes to the very brink of a precipitous fall. That is, he comes to the point where he himself will have to be taken as standing reserve, where we then basically get subsumed under this enframing of nature as quantifiable and calculable and ordered. Meanwhile, man precisely is the one so threatened, exalts himself to the posture of Lord of the earth. In this way, the impression comes to prevail that everything man encounters exists only insofar as it is his construct. This illusion gives rise in turn to one final delusion. It seems as though man everywhere and always encounters only himself. Heisenberg has with complete correctness pointed out that the real must present itself to contemporary man in this way. In truth, however, precisely nowhere does man today any longer encounter himself. Nowhere, Heidegger is saying, do human beings actually encounter their essence as this being which is at one and the same time condemned to make sense, and so enframe themselves, and yet free to make sense of themselves in any way that is possible. Man stands so decisively in attendance on the challenging forth of enframing that he does not apprehend enframing as a claim, that he fails to see himself as the one spoken to, and hence also fails in every way to hear in what respect he exists. From out of his essence, in the realm of an exhortation or address, and thus can never encounter only himself. But enframing does not endanger man in his relationship, this is getting us onto the second danger here. So again, the first danger occurs where we basically only begin to see ourselves as enframed in this quantifiable way. The second is that he says the essence of technology may conceal that a mode of revealing is occurring and is contingent, only one mode of revealing among other possibilities. That the essence of technology may conceal the fact that how we see the world now, through physics, through capitalism, as this thing to be quantified and made efficient for the sake of the production of profit and so on, that modern technology will conceal from us that really that is just one mode of revealing among other possibilities, and that then we will only see the world in that way. And so he says, enframing does not simply endanger man in his relationship to himself and to everything that is. As a destiny, it banishes man into that kind of revealing which is an ordering. Where this ordering holds sway, it drives out every other possibility of revealing. Above all, enframing conceals that revealing which, in the sense of poiesis, that bringing forth, lets what presence is come forth into appearance. As compared with that other revealing, the setting upon that challenges forth, thrusts man into a relation to that which is, that is at once antithetical and rigorously ordered. Where enframing holds sway, regulating and securing of the standing reserve mark all revealing. They no longer even let their own fundamental characteristic appear, namely, this revealing as such. That technology is a way of revealing and not simply a way of letting us see the world as, it really truly is. Because Heidegger is saying that's not the case. The world is not really truly one way. Thus, the challenging enframing not only conceals a former way of revealing, of bringing forth, but it conceals revealing itself. and with it, that wherein unconcealment, i.e. truth, comes to pass. And in that way, then, we run the risk, by being ignorant, unaware of the essence of technology, we run the risk of actually losing what is true about our existence. Now, the being of technology, the essence of technology, what technology is, Heidegger admits it is actually ambiguous. He says such ambiguity points to the mystery of all revealing, of truth, that the essence of technology, that why it cannot simply be defined as some thing which is definite and of which is subsumed under a genus, such that all things which have that similar trait are then said to be technology. That the essence of technology is linked to then the essence of the human existence, because it is a way of revealing, a way of truth. And so he says, and there's a kind of in the way that's ambiguous, and because of this ambiguity, there's kind of this paradox about truth and about being, specifically the being of technology and DASEIN, human being. And on the one hand, we have this slightly more negative stake here in the essence of technology, which is, he says, on the one hand, enframing challenges forth into the frenziedness of ordering that blocks every view into the coming to pass of revealing, and so radically endangers the relation to the essence of truth. That we can't but, of course, enframe the world in such a way, because we have to understand the world. There's a danger in that, though, which is that runs the risk of only seeing the world in that one way and not in all the other ways in which it can be seen. On the other hand, though, he says, enframing comes to pass for its part in the granting that lets man endure, as yet unexperienced, but perhaps more experienced in the future, that he may be the one who is needed and used for the safekeeping in the coming to presence of truth. Thus does the arising of the saving power appear. Thus does then the freedom and the positivity of enframing reveal itself to us in this way then of making sense of the world. For Heidegger then, to truly understand this, to get at, to truly understand the human condition and the way in which we make sense of the world, it is not philosophy which is primary. It is not philosophy which is that primary way of revealing the world to us. It actually is poetry. It is art, more generally. So he argues that the poetic aspect of art as TECHNE, as that knowledge which is an activity in art, the revealing of the true is coming to presence in the beautiful, not as standing reserved, can give rise to poetic revealing. So for the Greeks, he says, art was not simply culturally or aesthetically pleasing, as now the way modern technology, in the way that, of course, it has enframed everything and set it such that it is standing reserve, always on hand to be used in some way to extract energy or resources out of it. That for the Greeks, art, techne, was not simply something that was the secondary attribute, right, that was just pleasing. Instead, he says, what then was art, perhaps only for that brief but magnificent time? Why did art bear the modest name TECHNE? Because it was a revealing that brought forth and hither, and therefore belonged within poiesis, within that bringing forth of making sense of the world. It was finally that revealing which holds complete sway in all the fine arts, in poetry, and in everything poetical that obtained poiesis as its proper name. So for Heidegger then, there's a kind of returning to then poetry and seeing the positive aspect of poetry and of not seeing the world as only something quantifiable. And in this way, then, Heidegger is definitely not an Enlightenment philosopher. He's not one that sees this project of progress, such that was the case for Kant or John Locke, or even the case of John Stuart Mill, but even the case of someone like Marx. Heidegger doesn't see that, that's how the world works in this way of progression towards the true and the perfect and the more rational. And instead he's saying we need to go back then to that more kind of free way of living, which can only be done then by understanding the true nature of the poetic. So I want to end basically with how he ends this essay. Now, he famously does, when asked in an interview how we can address this problem of technology, and he famously says, only a God can save us. And there's a lot of talk about what exactly he meant, because he doesn't mean literally God will save us. But he's saying, well, I'll let you think for yourself, what does he mean by that only a God can save us from modern technology. But I do want to end here with this quote and then looking at the end of the essay. At one point in the essay, he says, when we once open ourselves expressly to the essence of technology, we find ourselves unexpectedly taken into a freeing claim. And so Heidegger wants us to take thinking seriously, and that we should always think about the ways in which we interact with all the objects in our world, and especially technology. That when we come to see and to truly consider technology as it presents itself to us, and not as we already understand it. So going back to Heidegger wants us to not take for granted the world as it is ordered and the way in which the world presents itself to us, but to listen carefully to then how it presents itself. And in that sense, then, we can see what freedom is, and the way in which we free ourselves ultimately from, then, this danger of modern technology. And so I want to end by reading the last little bit of the question concerning technology. So Heidegger writes, thus questioning, we bear witness to the crisis that in our sheer preoccupation with technology, we do not yet experience the coming to presence of technology. That in our sheer aesthetic mindedness, we no longer guard and preserve the coming to presence of art. Yet, the more questioningly we ponder the essence of technology, the more mysterious the essence of art becomes. The closer we come to the danger, the more brightly do the ways into the saving power begin to shine, and the more questioning we become. For questioning is the piety of thought. So for a discussion question, and this is, of course, this is a lot to take in. It's an essay that one would need to read multiple times, very slowly. But for a question I have here, is the problem of modern technology, of the totalization of technological enframing, putting everything into the standing reserve as already understood as something quantifiable, is it as bad as Heidegger argues? Is there a problem with everything being reduced to a matter of quantifiability? And I have here this kind of picture in the background. If anyone watches Westworld, in the newest season, there's this thing called Rehoboam, and we learn that this future world of humanity has basically, everyone has been kind of quantified and defined, and so their life has already been kind of destined in a similar way to what I think Heidegger is talking about here. And I think in many ways this third season of Westworld actually is influenced by Heidegger's essay, The Question Concerning Technology. And maybe there is a real problem that, especially with marketing and the way in which social media, starts to learn and collect data about ourselves, it starts to already kind of determine what it is we are going to do and how we are going to act, such that maybe we already become condemned to act in those certain ways. So I'll leave that to you to think about whether or not that is modern technology presents itself as the danger in the way in which Heidegger claims.